We'll turn now to the late 17th century in England, Germany, Spain, and the New World. First, we are in England in one of the most tumultuous centuries in the British history. Queen Elizabeth died in 1603 without an heir, and her cousin, then James I, ruled from 1603 to 1625. His son Charles ruled until he was executed in 1649 due to his usurping too much power. A commonwealth was established with Oliver Cromwell as the leader. They set up a military rule, and that was from 1649 to 1660. And during that time, there's very little music that was allowed to be presented out in the world. Finally, the Parliament was tired of the military rule, and they figured they would better deal with a king, so they restored, and Charles II came to the throne, and then James II. They were Catholic. Then when there was the Bloody Revolution, then William and Mary were brought to the throne, and we just have no end in sight to the problems. So as a result, when Parliament created the Bill of Rights in 1689, after the Glorious Revolution and the installation of William and Mary. They guaranteed civil liberties, but they subjected the monarch to the rule of law, and that meant that Parliament would collect and allocate public funds, and that meant that the monarch did not have the kind of money they had in France to lavish on the arts. So that definitely made a big difference in England. So really, the English preferred their masques to operas. There were many attempts to introduce opera, and sometimes being fought by the monarchs, and other times by the public that just was not interested. So a favorite court entertainment since Henry VIII was the masque, and they shared many features with opera, including instrumental music, dancing, songs, choruses, costume, scenery, lots of extravagance, and even stage machinery. But they were long collaborative spectacles, more like the French court ballets rather than a unified drama with one composer creating the music. So there are some examples of very elaborate masques, but we don't have much appearing that was of interest to us in later centuries. So Cromwell had banned stage plays, but not concerts. So we have some sneaky things going on when opera-like productions appeared with spoken dialogue, but included songs and dances and choruses and recitatives similar to the masques. John Blow's Venus and Adonis is the first work that is sung throughout, a mixture of Italian, French, and English styles, and with a strong presence of the chorus. But the opera that really stands out is by Henry Purcell, a student of John Blow, and he did teach at an English girls' school, and there's some thought that he created it for this girls' school, but other research has indicated that it was intended for the court. Purcell was a composer of odes and anthems, incidental music, and chamber music. His Dido and Aeneas is a true masterpiece, and certainly on a small scale. The whole performance only takes about an hour, so we usually refer to it as a masterpiece of opera in miniature. So the story is based on Virgil's Aeneid, and if you remember, we have Virgil was writing a history for Rome that would stand up to the Iliad and the Odyssey that the Greeks had for their founding of of, of their city and their rulers. So, and their history, because for the Greeks, they read the Iliad and the Odyssey. They were the basis for education for young students. Virgil is trying to do the same for Rome, and we're centering in this opera on the episode where we have Aeneas trying to go back to found Rome. His ship is wrecked on the Carthaginian shore. He meets and falls in love with the beautiful queen of Carthage, Dido. She had recently been widowed, and they have an affair. And then the story goes that he remembers that he is supposed to go and found Rome. So he sneaks away in the night and starts to leave. The ship's sails are mounting, and Dido sees them and knows what's happening. She sends for Aeneas. He comes back. He has a change of heart. He feels bad. Okay, I'll stay. I'm sorry. But Dido will have none of it, and she sends him away. But then she's brokenhearted. She can no longer rule her people because she's been disgraced by having this affair, and then he's going to go off and leave her. So she has to essentially commit suicide. They build a funeral pyre, and then, as is typical in opera, the heroine is going to sing her lament as she climbs onto the funeral pyre and expires. So that's basically the story. Now we start with there is a recitative, and the treat here is that we are in English, so you don't have to struggle to to look at the Italian or later on the French and try to try to translate things, but you will sometimes, ironically, it's hard to understand the words, but in this opening recitative, it's not a problem. Thy hand, Belinda, darkness shades me, on thy bosom let me rest. More I would, but death invades me. Death is now a welcome guest. She's brokenhearted. So Belinda will help her up onto the funeral pyre, and Dido sings her famous lament, When I Am Laid in Earth. It's a two-part aria over a ground bass. Now, we talked briefly about an ostinato in an Italian madrigal that we listened to in the early Baroque, Monteverdi's piece. So a bass that repeats over and over. In Italy, we call it an ostinato, from the verb obstinate, so an obstinate bass. But in England, it is a ground bass, and we have 11 statements of this bass. And it's in triple meter, and we have that's one statement, and then so it goes half step. So chromatically descending, and then it goes to a cadence. So that is the bass. We're going to hear that as we hear her singing lament above it. It makes a very beautiful non-imitative counterpoint between the soprano melody and that ground bass. And then we go to the lament. That's the A section. Now that's repeated. This is the B section. And then the repeat. And the closing chorus, just like a Greek chorus, it comments on the events. There's a lot of word painting, the drooping wings with falling line, and the scattered roses with the kind of meandering line, and the soft with the sigh gesture. The text is homophonic and firm, which gives a firm sense of resolve to the events that have transpired. such a powerful statement, and it's really those descending sighs that create this mournful mood that we have here so powerfully. Other English music, we have semi-operas, spoken play with an overture, 4 or 5 interpolated masks or musical scenes. And Purcell is a master here as well, The Fairy Queen, based on A Midsummer Night's Dream of Shakespeare. Vocal music for the church, ceremonies, taverns, male gatherings, instrumental music, concert music, ensembles of like instruments like gambas, dance music. And the English were also pioneer in public concerts after 1670. In Germany, we have the Stadtpfeifer, the town's musicians that provided music for the city, performed for ceremonies, parades, weddings, and often they were proficient at many instruments. The Turnsonaten, the tower music that played daily, wind instruments also played from the town hall. The Collegium Musicum, the amateur music making group, it was a middle-class organization. And we have a Collegium Musicum at Cal State Long Beach, and many universities all over the country and certainly all over Europe continue the tradition. And often, instead of being amateur, they are actually more highbrow because they try to perform with good performance practice techniques on original instruments often, and with the performance practice of the day. So in vocal music, opera was largely imported, Italian opera. Kaiser was the leading composer of German opera. The songs that flourished were simple songs called Lieder. In German, nouns are capitalized, hence the capital L, and one song would be a Lied, L-I-E-D. Plural refers to songs, a group of songs. We have sacred music continuing the tradition of concerted music, like we heard in the Schütz grand polychoral work, and often chorale tunes. Buxtehude is a leading composer of sacred music during this time. And altogether, it's the golden age of the organ in Germany from 1650 to 1750. In northern Germany, the tradition of Sweelinck and Scheidt is prominent. Buxtehude is the organist at Lübeck. In central Germany, we have J.S. Bach at Leipzig. And in South Germany, we have Pachelbel of the Pachelbel canon fame. Organ music is often written to precede something in the service. For example, toccatas, fugues, chorale settings. Toccatas were free improvisatory work. Literally means staccato from toccare, to touch. Inserted fugal sections were common. Fugues, we heard that little organ fugue in G minor of Bach, so you have some idea about how a fugue works. You have a subject in one voice that's then imitated in another. It's called an answer. It can be real or tonal, and then you have episodes, and fugal entries can also be augmented. For example, quarter notes become half notes. They can be in diminution, so they can be shorter notes, inversions, or strettos. And we will study the fugue thoroughly when we get to Bach. But in this example, Buxtehude's Preludium in E, Nom 97, despite the title, it is a toccata. It has a free opening section, and then it has fugal sections that alternate with free sections. The opening measures give an example of that improvisatory quality, and then the first fugue begins at measure 13. There's 4 voices in the exposition. The answer is tonal. In other words, it stays in the key. It doesn't adjust to have an exact set of intervals as the subject. The second the second exposition begins in measure 24 to measure 32, then another episode, and then entries enter again at measure 45. So all of that is the first fugue. The free section takes us to a high pitch. Second fugue begins at measure 60, a third at measure 75, and a fourth fugue at 91. So, and the theme from the first fugue recurs in that third and fourth fugue. So let's listen to Buxtehude's Preludium in E. The answer in the alto. The subject in the tenor. Then the subject in the pedal was a little hard to hear there. Have a free section. And now we have the very presto, fast version, starting at the second fugue. It started at measure 60. The two high voices. improvisatory section finishing the fugal part. You hear that compound meter for that third fugue, triple V, triple V, triple V. A little adagio interlude, improvisatory in style, will take us to the fourth fugue. Now, chorale settings became a staple of German music. Chorale is the German term for a hymn. There were the typical settings would be simple chorale harmonizations with the melody in the top voice. And of course, Bach's chorale settings still stand as the paradigm of the four-part treatment, a four-part tonal counterpoint. So it might be that simple setting. It could be a chorale variation, could be a chorale fantasia that was more contrapuntal. And the shortest and maybe the most prominent type was called a chorale prelude. The tune was heard only once, usually in the top voice, with or without embellishments. And it could be in other voices. Sometimes each phrase might be treated as a fugue, similar to a fantasia. And we will listen to a chorale prelude when we get to Bach's music. In the instrumental category, the keyboard suite in Germany was established by Froberger. The keyboard sonata was not an important keyboard genre in the Baroque, but the title was first used by Kuhnau in his Frische Klavierfrüchte, Fresh Clavier Fruit, in 1696. And later he even created a programmatic sonata. The one that's the most fun features the combat of David and Goliath, where we hear, it's very programmatic, and you hear the stomping of the big Goliath, and then you hear the small footsteps of David. You hear the rock being flung. It's quite a fun piece. The orchestral suite was common in Germany, inspired by the ballet suites of Lully. No set sequence of dances, the most significant works by Bach and Handel. J.K.F. Fischer composed preludes and fugues in 20 major and minor keys, published in his Ariadne Musica of 1715. This is significant because it's the principal forerunner of Bach's Well-Tempered Clavier, book one that came out in 1722, when Bach celebrated equal temperament by writing 24 preludes and fugues in every major and minor key. And then later in 17 40s, 41, 42, he completed the second book of the Well-Tempered Clavier. So we have in all 48 preludes and fugues, 24 in book 1, 24 in book 2. And when we get to Bach, we will listen to his fugue in E major that was the same subject that J.K.F. Fischer used in his Ariadne Musica for the E major fugue. It's slightly lengthened, note values are doubled, and of course Bach takes a rather straightforward fugue and turns it into a magnificent tour de force. So we'll be coming back to that when we get to Bach. Now in Spain and the New World, we are confronted with, first of all, Spain is the richest and most powerful nation in the late 15th and 16th centuries. The empire is declining during the 17th century, but they maintain control over much of the New World, and this is significant for the music that was being produced. So it's a mixture of styles. Of course, the native music includes African music from imported slaves, European music from Spain. The New World sounds also influenced Spain, so it was a two-way street. Juan Hidalgo composed two early operas, syllabic strophic arias in Spanish style, and with recitatives reserved for dramatic moments. The zarzuela was a predominant type of theater developed by Hidalgo. It alternates spoken dialogue with ensembles and songs. La Purpura de la Rosa, The Blood of the Rose, is the first opera produced in the New World. It was staged in 1701 in Peru to celebrate the coronation of Philip V in Spain. The libretto was adapted from Hidalgo's first opera. The composer is Tomás de Torín y Velasco. He may have studied with Hidalgo, but he is the most famous composer in the Americas. Now, typically, most roles were played by women, so it's a switch rather than having a man's role that was played by a young boy. Now we have the roles played by women. The story is about the love between Venus and Adonis. They converse in music and dialogue. We'll hear syncopations from the Spanish style, and it closes with a chorus. You'll hear in the accompaniment harps, guitars, and viols. So that's from our first opera in the New World. Now, sacred music continued the traditional Renaissance style, and the genre in the Americas was the villancicos for one or more choirs. Could be choir and solo or just solo, sung at important feast days like Easter, sung in the vernacular, not in Latin. Albricius Pastores Nam 92 is a villancico for Christmas. The composer, Juan Gutierrez de Padilla, he was active in Mexico. We'll hear two choirs, they alternate and then join together. The syncopations of Spain and West Africa, and we'll hear the announcement to shepherds of the good news of Christ's birth.